Clara Whitaker pressed her trembling hands flat against her skirt and took one step forward, just one, before the whispers started. Every candle in that ballroom felt like an eye watching her walk toward the most feared man in New York society. She had come with nothing but her father's name and a grief too heavy to hide. They had sent her to be destroyed. She knew it. She walked anyway. If this story moves you, subscribe and follow Clara until the very end. Drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. The summer of 1815 arrived in New York City the way it always did, loud, perfumed, and merciless to anyone who didn't belong. Harrow House stood at the end of a wide avenue lined with elm trees, their leaves thick and dark green in the July heat. The estate was the grandest private residence in the city, and on the night of the summer assembly, every family of consequence had packed themselves inside its candlelit ballroom, wearing their finest clothes and their sharpest opinions. Clara Whitaker did not belong there. She knew it. Every woman in that room knew it. The only question was how long it would take before someone made sure she knew it loudly. She stood near the east wall beside a row of tall windows holding a small glass of lemonade she hadn't touched. Her gown was ivory simple, clean, well-made, but not extravagant. It had been her mother's once altered carefully by her Aunt Margaret's steady hands. It was the best she had. In a room full of silk and imported lace, it was also the least. She had arrived in New York 3 weeks earlier, traveling from Staunton, Virginia, after her father's death in April. Walter Whitaker had been a merchant and small landowner, not a wealthy man by New York standards, but an honest one. He had left Clara his name, his debts, and a set of legal documents she could not find anywhere in his study. Documents that, according to the family solicitor in Virginia, proved that Walter had held partial interest in a shipping venture out of New York Harbor, shares that should have transferred to Clara upon his death. Those shares had disappeared. Every inquiry Clara made had been met with polite confusion or outright silence. She had written 3 letters to the firm that managed the shipping accounts. None had been answered. Her Aunt Margaret, her father's older sister, had brought her to New York with a single piece of practical advice. "You will not find the truth sitting in a boarding house," Margaret had said, straightening Clara's collar before they left for Harrow House that evening. "The men who took what is yours move in rooms like that one. You have to be in the room, Clara. You have to be seen." Clara had nodded. She understood the logic. She had not expected that being seen would feel quite so much like standing in front of a loaded rifle. Across the ballroom, Evelyn Price moved through the crowd the way a woman moves when she has never once doubted her welcome anywhere. She was 24, golden-haired, and possessed of a beauty that society rewarded with the kind of uncritical admiration that made a person dangerous. Her father, Judge Silas Price, stood near the fireplace with a circle of powerful men, lawyers, merchants, a city alderman. He wore the same expression he always wore in public, dignified, generous, untouchable. Clara had heard the name Price before she ever set foot in New York. Her father had mentioned Judge Price in a letter written 2 months before he died, a letter Clara had read so many times she had memorized it without trying. "There is a matter with the Price account I intend to resolve personally," her father had written. "Do not concern yourself with it yet. I will write more when I know more." He had not written more. He had died of a fever 6 weeks later, and whatever he had known about Judge Price had died with him. Clara was still thinking about that letter when Evelyn Price appeared at her elbow. "Miss Whitaker?" Evelyn's voice was warm, practiced the kind of warmth that never quite reached the eyes. "I'm so glad you could come tonight. I heard you had arrived in the city. How brave of you to make the journey so soon after your loss." "Thank you," Clara said. "You're very kind. I hope you're finding your way around New York. It can be overwhelming for someone from a smaller place." Evelyn glanced around the room with the casual ease of a woman surveying her own property. "Have you met many people yet?" "A few," Clara said. "You should meet more." Evelyn turned back to her with a smile that held something underneath it, something calculated and quiet. "In fact, you see the gentleman near the center of the room, the tall one, dark coat, standing alone." Clara looked. She saw him immediately, partly because he was tall, and partly because despite the crowd around him, there was a distinct circle of empty space near where he stood, as if the room itself had decided to give him room. That is Nathaniel Harrow, Evelyn said. This is his house, his family's estate. He is the wealthiest unmarried man in New York and the most difficult. Difficult, Clara repeated. Cold, Evelyn said pleasantly. He has refused every woman who has approached him this season. Not rudely, that's not his way, but firmly. He simply looks at them as though they are not quite worth his time, and they feel it. She paused. It has become something of a tradition, actually. Women try. He declines. The room watches. Clara said nothing. The final dance of the evening is in 20 minutes. Evelyn continued. It is customary for a woman to request it or to receive the request. No one has dared ask him directly in 2 seasons. She tilted her head. You seem like a brave woman, Miss Whittaker. I wonder have you the courage to try? Clara understood then. She understood all of it in the space of a single breath. The way Evelyn had sought her out. The casual arrangement of the dare. The timing. 20 minutes before the final dance in a room full of people who already knew her name was not one of theirs. If she refused the dare, she was a coward. A woman who came to New York with nothing and proved she deserved nothing. If she tried, and Nathaniel Harrow refused her the way he had refused every other woman, she would become the evening's entertainment. The Virginia girl who didn't know better. The charity case who reached above herself and was put back in her place before the whole of New York society. Either way, Evelyn won. Clara set her untouched lemonade down on the windowsill behind her. Which way is he standing? She asked. Evelyn blinked. It was the only crack in her composure. I beg your pardon. Mr. Harrow, Clara said. Which direction is he facing? I want to approach from the front. It would be rude to come at him from behind. There was a half-second of silence. He is facing the east corridor, Evelyn said slowly. Thank you, Clara said. And she walked away. She did not run. She did not hesitate after the first step because she understood that hesitation would be visible, and visibility was a weapon in a room like this one. She kept her chin level and her hands still, and she crossed the ballroom floor the way her father had always told her to cross any difficult ground, 1 foot in front of the other, eyes ahead, and no looking back to see who was watching. Everyone was watching. She felt it on her shoulders, on the back of her neck, in the sudden hush that spread through nearby conversations the way a stone spreads, rings across still water. Heads turned. Fans paused mid-motion. A woman near the punch bowl leaned toward her companion and whispered something behind her glove. Clara kept walking. Nathaniel Harrow was 34 years old, and he had the look of a man who had been told difficult truths often enough that he had stopped flinching at them. His face was not what one would call kind. It was angular, and still the kind of face that gave nothing away without permission. His dark coat was well cut and understated. He held no drink. He was not performing enjoyment of the evening, and he did not pretend to be. He saw her coming before she reached him. She was certain of it. His gaze shifted to her face when she was still 10 feet away, and it stayed there calm and direct, without the polite social drift that most men use to signal discomfort. Clara stopped in front of him. She was aware of the complete and devastating silence that had fallen over the nearest quarter of the room. Mr. Harrow, she said. Her voice was even. She was proud of that. My name is Clara Whittaker. I have come from Virginia, and I do not know many people in this city. I understand it is customary for the final dance to be requested rather than assumed. She paused. Would you honor me with it? Nathaniel Harrow looked at her for a long moment. His eyes were dark and steady, and they did something that she had not expected from a man known for coldness. They looked at her. Not at her gown, or her posture, or the family name she was or wasn't attached to. At her face. At the thing behind her face that she had been trying to keep hidden since she walked through the door, the fact that she was tired and frightened and determined not to let either one win. Miss Whittaker, he said. His voice was low and unhurried. I would. He extended his hand, and Clara Whittaker, who had come to New York with nothing but a dead man's unfinished letter and a set of missing papers, and 3 weeks of silence from every person who should have answered her questions. Clara Whittaker took his hand. Behind her, she heard the room breathe. The dance was a slow waltz, and Nathaniel Harrow did not speak immediately. He led with confidence unhurried, and Clara followed without stumbling, which she considered a minor personal victory given that her heart was conducting what felt like its own separate emergency. "You were aware," he said finally, "that Miss Price intended that invitation as a trap." It was not a question. "Yes," Clara said. "And you walked into it anyway." "I walked through it," she said. "There is a difference." He was quiet for a moment. Then something shifted in his expression. Not a smile exactly, but something near it. Something that suggested a smile was a thing he had not entirely forgotten how to produce. "Where in Virginia?" he asked. "Staunton," she said. "My father was Walter Whitaker. He held merchant interests here in New York, shipping shares. He passed in April." "I'm sorry," Nathaniel said. "Thank you." She kept her voice level. "I am in the city trying to recover certain documents related to his estate. His solicitor believes there are accounts that should have transferred to me, but the records appear to have gone missing." Nathaniel's expression did not change, but something in his eyes sharpened. "What firm managed the accounts?" he asked. "I was told it was Price and Alderman," Clara said. "I have written 3 letters. I have received no reply." The music turned. They moved through a slow quarter circle, and Clara felt the eyes of the room tracking them like compass needles tracking north. "I know of that firm," Nathaniel said carefully. "I suspected you might," Clara said. "Your family holds considerable interests in New York shipping, if I understand correctly." "We do," he said. "Miss Whitaker, how much do you know about Judge Silas Price?" She looked up at him directly. "Less than I intend to." He studied her for another long moment. "Be careful," he said quietly. "The Price family has considerable influence in this city. Men who question that influence tend to find their inquiries redirected." "Women too, it seems," Clara said. The corner of his mouth moved. "Women too," he agreed. The waltz was ending. Clara could feel it in the rhythm of the music, the way the notes began to draw themselves toward a close. In 30 seconds, she would release his hand and step back, and the room would close in again with all its opinions and all its teeth. "Mr. Harrow," she said, keeping her voice low enough that only he could hear. "I did not come tonight to find a husband. I came to find the truth about my father's accounts. If you know anything about Price and Alderman that might help me, I would be grateful for the conversation. And if you know nothing useful, I hope the dance was at least pleasant." The music stopped. Nathaniel Harrow released her hand and stepped back. Around them, polite applause broke the silence. The social machinery of the room re-engaging now that the spectacle had resolved without disaster. He looked at her with that same direct steadiness, and this time there was something in it that Clara hadn't seen in anyone's face since she left Virginia, something that looked unexpectedly like respect. "It was the most pleasant dance I have taken in 2 seasons, he said. "And I know considerably more about Price and Alderman than would fit in a ballroom." He paused. "If you would be willing to receive callers, Miss Whitaker, I will send a formal note to your aunt's address tomorrow morning." Clara held his gaze. "We are staying at the Wentworth boarding house on Chambers Street," she said. "I will tell my aunt to expect it." She curtsied. He bowed. And Clara Whitaker walked back across the ballroom floor, not the same woman who had crossed it 20 minutes before. That woman had been frightened. This one had a lead. Evelyn Price was still standing near the east windows when Clara passed her. Evelyn's face was composed, but her eyes were doing something that Clara recognized as recalculation. "Well," Evelyn said softly. "Good evening, Miss Price," Clara said, and kept walking. Margaret was waiting at the edge of the room, her shawl drawn tight despite the summer heat. Her expression caught somewhere between relief and suspicion. "You danced with Nathaniel Harrow," she said. "I did." "The whole room saw." "I know." Margaret studied her niece's face. "Are you all right?" Clara thought about it honestly. Her hands had stopped shaking. Her voice felt like her own again. The fear that had pressed against her ribs since she walked through the door had not gone, but it had changed shape, become something smaller and harder, more like purpose than panic. "I found out where my father's accounts were managed," she said. "Price and Alderman. Evelyn Price's father controls that firm." Margaret went very still. And Nathaniel Harrow, Clara continued, knows more about it than he said in public. He is sending a note tomorrow. Her aunt was quiet for a long moment. Around them the ballroom resumed its noise and motion, the assembled weight of New York society returning to its regular rhythms now that the entertainment was concluded. Your father always said, Margaret began slowly, that the truth about a man's money was the truest thing you could know about him. He was right, Clara said. She glanced once more across the room. Nathaniel Harrow had returned to his place near the east corridor. He was not looking at her, or if he was, he had the discipline not to show it. Judge Silas Price was still holding court near the fireplace, still wearing that expression of untouchable dignity, still surrounded by men who believed in his version of things. He did not look like a man who expected to be found out. Clara had learned in the 3 months since her father's death that the men who expected the least scrutiny were usually the ones who most deserved it. She turned away from the ballroom and followed her aunt toward the door, and she did not look back, not because she was afraid, but because there was nothing behind her worth looking at anymore. Everything she needed was ahead. The note arrived at the Wentworth boarding house at 8:30 the following morning. Clara was already awake. She had not slept well, not from anxiety exactly, but from the particular restlessness of a mind that had found a thread and could not stop pulling at it. She had sat at the small writing desk in her room before dawn, laying out everything she knew in careful order. Her father's letter, the name of the firm, the 3 unanswered inquiries. The look on Judge Price's face across the ballroom, that expression of settled, comfortable power that belonged to men who had never once been held accountable for anything. She was still sitting there when Margaret knocked and entered carrying a folded letter on a small tray, the way she always carried things of consequence with both hands, as if the weight of a thing was not always its physical weight. It came with a messenger, Margaret said. Boy couldn't have been more than 12. Said he was to wait for a reply. Clara broke the seal. The handwriting was exact and unhurried, the penmanship of a man who did not need to impress anyone with flourishes. Miss Whittaker, I write to request the honor of calling upon you and Mrs. Margaret Whittaker at 10 o'clock this morning, if that hour is convenient. I have information pertaining to the matter we discussed briefly last evening. I believe it is information you will find relevant. N. Harrow. Clara read it twice. Then she looked at her aunt. Tell the boy yes, she said. Margaret looked at the letter, then at Clara, then at the letter again. You understand what this means, she said. If Nathaniel Harrow calls on a woman formally, this city will have them engaged before luncheon. Let them talk, Clara said. They were talking last night and I survived it. Margaret pressed her lips together in the way she did when she disagreed with something, but recognized that arguing would not change it. She took the tray back to the door. I'll order tea, she said, and put on the good shawl. Nathaniel Harrow arrived at precisely 10 o'clock, which told Clara something about him before he spoke a word. Punctuality in a powerful man was not a small thing. It meant he considered other people's time worth keeping. He sat across from Clara and Margaret in the small front parlor of the boarding house, turning his hat in his hands once, before setting it aside, the only sign of anything other than complete composure. I'll speak plainly, he said, because I believe that is what you prefer. It is, Clara said. Price and Alderman is not a legitimate merchant firm in the traditional sense, he said. It operates under the appearance of one, but for the past several years it has functioned primarily as a vehicle through which Judge Price redirects investment proceeds, other men's money, into accounts that do not appear on any public ledger. The room was quiet. My father's shipping shares, Clara said. If Walter Whittaker held interest in the New York harbor venture through that firm, then yes, his proceeds would have been among those redirected. Nathaniel paused. I became aware of this arrangement approximately 8 months ago. I have been gathering information carefully. Judge Price has enough influence over the city magistrate's office that an accusation without sufficient proof would not simply fail. It would be turned against the person making it, which is why you haven't gone to anyone yet, Clara said. Which is why I haven't gone to anyone yet, he confirmed. Margaret, who had been sitting very still with her teacup raised halfway to her mouth, set it down. Mr. Harrow, she said slowly, Why are you telling us this? Nathaniel looked at her directly. Because your niece walked across a ballroom last night knowing she was walking into a trap, and she did it with more composure than most men I know bring to a contract negotiation. That is not a common quality. He paused. And because she is the only other person in this city who has sufficient personal injury from Price's actions to give legal standing to a formal complaint if we can find the right documents. Clara felt something shift in the air of that small room. Not romance, not gratitude. Something harder and more useful than either. What documents do you need? She asked. Your father's original investment agreement with the venture, he said. The one that established his shares. If that document still exists, it proves the interest existed before Price's firm got hold of it. It becomes the foundation of everything. I don't have it, Clara said. I searched my father's study before I left Virginia. I found receipts, correspondence, old ledgers, nothing relating to New York shipping. Where else might he have kept papers he considered sensitive? Nathaniel asked. Clara thought. She thought about her father, a careful man, a quiet man. A man who kept his worries to himself until he had resolved them. She thought about the letter he had written 2 months before he died. A matter with the Price account I intend to resolve personally. His solicitor in Staunton, she said suddenly. Mr. Hadley, my father trusted him with everything. If he gave any documents to anyone for safekeeping, it would have been Hadley. Have you contacted him since your father's death? He handled the estate matters locally, Clara said. I wrote to him about the New York accounts. He said he had no record of them. She stopped. Something cold moved through her. He said he had no record of them. Nathaniel watched her face. But my father trusted him completely, she said more slowly. He would not have kept those documents from me unless... She stopped again. Unless someone asked him to, Nathaniel said quietly. The weight of it settled over the room like a change in weather. Margaret set both hands flat on her knees. Are you telling us, she said to Nathaniel, with a precision in her voice that Clara recognized as the particular tone her aunt used when she was controlling something very strong, that Silas Price may have reached all the way to a small-town Virginia solicitor to cover his trail? Judge Price has been building this network for 15 years, Nathaniel said. He does not leave loose ends by accident. He leaves them on purpose because a loose end that frightens a man into silence is more useful than a loose end that gets cut. Clara stood up. She did not pace. She stood because she needed to feel the ground under her feet while she thought. If Hadley has those papers, and he's been told to stay quiet, he won't give them to me voluntarily, she said. Not if he's frightened. No. Nathaniel agreed. But frightened men can be moved, she said. If they're shown that the thing they fear is already coming regardless of whether they cooperate. Nathaniel was quiet for a moment. Then, that is a sophisticated piece of thinking, Miss Whitaker. My father raised me on his business correspondence, she said. I read every letter that came through that house. I know how men like Hadley think. He's not corrupt, he's afraid. Those are different problems. They are, Nathaniel said. Can you write to him in a way that conveys without threatening that the matter is already being investigated and that cooperation will be viewed more favorably than continued silence? I can write that letter in 20 minutes, Clara said. Margaret looked at her niece with an expression that was half pride and half the resigned acknowledgement that Clara had always been going to be exactly this much trouble. I'll get the writing paper, Margaret said. Clara wrote the letter to Hadley that morning, with Nathaniel Harrow sitting across the room reviewing his own notes, and Margaret sitting between them drinking her second cup of tea with the deliberate calm of a woman determined not to acknowledge the unusual nature of the situation. The letter took her 35 minutes, not 20. She wrote 3 drafts. The first was too soft. The second was too direct. The third struck the register she needed, formal, measured, and carrying in its careful phrasing a quiet but unmistakable message. The truth is already in motion, and your best protection is to be on the right side of it before it arrives. She handed it to Nathaniel when she finished. He read it twice without speaking. When he looked up, there was something in his expression that she had not yet put a name to something that had been building since the ballroom and was becoming harder to categorize as merely professional regard. This is well done, he said. It will work or it won't, Clara said. But it's the right letter. It is, he said. He folded it carefully and handed it back. I can arrange for a trusted messenger to carry it to Staunton within the week. Someone who will not be connected to either of us. Good, Clara said. He stood to leave and reached for his hat. Then he stopped. Miss Whitaker, he said, and there was a different weight to the words now, something more deliberate. I want to say something that is outside the practical matter. Clara waited. Last night, he said. I have attended that assembly every summer for 6 years. I have watched this city perform itself at my family's expense for longer than I find comfortable to admit. He paused. Last night was the first time in a very long while that I watched someone do something genuinely brave in that room. Not politically brave, not strategically brave, actually brave. He looked at her directly. I wanted you to know that I saw it. Clara held his gaze. I wasn't sure anyone had, she said honestly. I did, he said. Then he put his hat on, nodded to Margaret, and left. Margaret waited until his footsteps had cleared the front landing. Then she turned to Clara with an expression that combined deep affection with something very close to exasperation. Clara Ann Whitaker, she said. Don't, Clara said. I'm simply noting. Margaret. Her aunt picked up her teacup. I'm noting nothing, she said primly and drank. The days that followed were not quiet. Word had spread through New York society with the efficiency that only genuine gossip achieves. The story of the Virginia girl and the final dance at Harrow House moved through drawing rooms and morning calls and carefully worded letters delivered between households with a speed that Clara found both exhausting and instructive. She received 3 invitations the following week. 2 were genuine women who were curious about her and willing to extend cautious social warmth. One was from Evelyn Price. Clara read Evelyn's invitation twice, then showed it to Margaret. She wants to take tea, Margaret said flatly. She wants to take measure, Clara said. She's trying to find out what Nathaniel said to me. Don't go. I'm going, Clara said. Margaret set down the invitation. Why? Because refusing tells her I'm afraid of her, Clara said. And because if I sit across from her for an hour, I will learn something useful. I always do. Evelyn Price's house was the second finest residence in the neighborhood, decorated with the particular determination of a family that was almost at the top and intended to get there. Evelyn received her in a front sitting room, tea already poured, her smile already arranged. Miss Whitaker, she said, I'm so pleased you came. Miss Price, Clara said, and sat down. They observed the social forms for approximately 11 minutes. The polite questions about Virginia, the careful remarks about the heat, the observations about mutual acquaintances. Evelyn was skilled at it. Clara matched her. It was in its way a kind of fencing. Then Evelyn set down her cup and looked at Clara with something closer to honesty. I owe you an apology, she said. Clara waited. The dare last evening? Evelyn said. It was unkind. I put you in an unfair position, and I am sorry for it. Clara studied her face. The apology had the shape of sincerity, and not quite the substance of it, but there was something underneath it that was real, even if it was not remorse. Something that looked more like recalculation than contrition. I accept your apology, Clara said carefully. Evelyn was quiet for a moment. Then, he's never danced with anyone before, you know. In 6 years, not the final dance. So, I was told, Clara said. It surprised everyone. Evelyn turned her teacup slowly in her hands. It surprised me. I imagine it did, Clara said. Evelyn looked up. What did you say to him? There it was. The whole point of the invitation, the tea, the apology, all of it, a path to this single question. Clara smiled pleasantly. We discussed Virginia, she said. And the summer heat, the usual things. Evelyn held her gaze for a long moment. She was intelligent. Clara had not underestimated that, and she knew she was being managed. The question was whether she would push further or accept the deflection with grace. She accepted it, which told Clara something important. Evelyn Price, for all her social weaponry, was not entirely certain of her own position. My father speaks very highly of Mr. Harrow, Evelyn said, moving to safer ground. They have known each other for many years. My father has been hoping that a closer connection between the families might develop. Is that so? Clara said. He believes it would be advantageous, Evelyn said. For everyone. How generous of him, Clara said, to think of everyone. There was a beat of silence. Evelyn's expression shifted by a fraction, something tightened around her eyes. My father is a very thorough man, she said. He tends to ensure that arrangements go according to plan. I have no doubt, Clara said pleasantly. She stayed for exactly the appropriate amount of time, 30 minutes, not a minute less or more, and left with her posture straight and her face composed. She was halfway back to Chambers Street before she let herself think about what Evelyn had said. My father tends to ensure that arrangements go according to plan. It was not a threat. It was structured to sound like a simple description of character. But the placement of it directly after the mention of a marriage arrangement between the Harrow and Price families had been deliberate. Clara was certain of it. Judge Price had a plan. And whoever did not fit into that plan would be managed. She walked faster. When she reached the boarding house, a second letter was waiting. Not from Nathaniel this time. Not from anyone she recognized. The handwriting on the outside was plain and unpracticed. The seal a plain wax impression with no mark. She opened it, standing in the hallway. There were 8 words inside. Leave New York before you destroy yourself, Miss Whitaker. Miss? Clara read it 3 times. Then she folded it carefully, tucked it into her pocket, and went upstairs to find her aunt. Margaret read the note and went very still in a way that Clara recognized as the particular stillness of a woman deciding between fear and fury. This ends it, Margaret said. We go home. We don't, Clara said. Clara, if they wanted us gone, they would have ignored us, Clara said. Her voice was steady. She felt the steadiness herself, the way you feel the ground under your feet when you find solid footing on uncertain terrain. This note means we're close enough to something that they're worried. You don't warn someone who isn't a threat. Margaret looked at her for a long moment. Your father used to say exactly that kind of thing, she said. Right before he walked into trouble. He was usually right, Clara said. He was also dead at 53, Margaret said quietly. The words landed. Clara felt them. She held them for a moment honestly, because they deserved that, because Margaret loved her and was afraid, and that fear was not small or foolish. I know, Clara said softly. I know, Margaret. She sat down beside her aunt and took her hands. But those shares are mine. My father earned them. Someone took them and covered the evidence, and now they're sending letters to frighten me into going home quietly. She paused. I won't go home quietly. I can't. Margaret looked at her niece's hands, then at her face. No, she said finally. I don't suppose you can. She straightened. Then we'd better be smarter than they are. We already are, Clara said. We just need to prove it. That evening, Clara wrote to Nathaniel Harrow. She did not describe the full content of the anonymous note, not because she didn't trust him, but because she had learned from watching her father that the first rule of a difficult negotiation was to control what information you gave and when. She told him only that the situation had developed in ways that suggested increasing urgency, and that she would welcome the opportunity to meet again at his earliest convenience. His reply came before breakfast the next morning. Tomorrow. My family's library. 10 o'clock. Come through the garden entrance less visible from the street. I will explain why when I see you. N.H. Clara read the last line 3 times. I will explain why when I see you. Which meant he had his own news. Which meant something had moved while she was sitting in Evelyn Price's drawing room, listening to veiled threats dressed as small talk. She set the letter down and looked out the window at the summer morning, at the ordinary noise of the street below, horses and voices, and the particular American chaos of a city that didn't stop for anyone's troubles. She thought about her father, about the letter he had never finished, about the shares he had earned, and the truth he had been on his way to finding when the fever took him. She thought about Nathaniel Harrow's face across a ballroom, the steadiness of it, the way he had looked at her like she was a person worth the trouble of seeing clearly. She thought about 8 words written in plain handwriting on plain paper. Leave New York before you destroy yourself. Clara picked up the letter and read it one final time. Tomorrow. 10 o'clock. Garden entrance. She was going to be early. She arrived 9 minutes early. The garden entrance to Harrow House was a narrow iron gate set into the estate's south wall, half hidden by the overgrowth of a summer that had been too hot and too busy for anyone to think about trimming hedges. Clara found it without difficulty. Nathaniel's directions had been precise, and pushed it open with both hands, the hinges protesting quietly in the morning heat. A young man she did not recognize was waiting just inside. He nodded once, said nothing, and led her through a side corridor into the house. Nathaniel was already in the library when she arrived. He was standing, not sitting, which told her the news was not the kind that lent itself to comfortable chairs. There was a second person in the room, a man of about 50, slight and pale, with the particular look of someone who had not slept well in several days and had stopped expecting that to change. Nathaniel turned when she entered. "Miss Whitaker, thank you for coming." He gestured to the pale man. "This is Edmund Graves. Until 4 days ago, he was a records clerk at the firm of Price and Alderman." Clara looked at Graves. Graves looked at his own hands. "Mr. Graves," she said. "Miss Whitaker." His voice was thin. "I've heard about you. From the people who don't want you here." "What did they say?" she asked. "They said you were a nuisance that would resolve itself," he said. "That you'd go home once you realized there was nothing to find." He finally looked up. "They were wrong about the second part." Clara sat down. "Tell me what you know," she said. Graves told her. It took 20 minutes and 3 separate moments where he stopped entirely and had to be steadied by his own breathing before he could continue. What he described was not complicated in its mechanics. It was complicated only in the scale of its audacity. Judge Silas Price had been systematically redirecting investment proceeds from accounts managed through his firm for the better part of a decade. The accounts belonged to men, and in at least 2 cases, women who had invested in New York harbor ventures and trusted Price's firm to manage the returns. The money did not disappear. It moved into accounts registered under names that did not correspond to real persons, then out again into funds that benefited the Price family directly. Walter Whitaker's shares had been among the earliest accounts affected. His investment had been redirected within 6 months of the original venture's first profitable season, 2 full years before his death. He never knew, Clara said. It was not a question. She was thinking of her father at his desk in Virginia, writing his correspondence, keeping his careful ledgers, trusting that the numbers he was given were the numbers that existed. He knew something was wrong at the end, Graves said. He wrote to the firm, 3 letters. I was the one who received them. The room went very quiet. "What did you do with them?" Clara asked. Graves's hands pressed flat against his knees. "I gave them to Mr. Price's assistant," he said, "as I was instructed to do with all correspondence of a sensitive nature." He paused. "I told myself I didn't know what would happen to them, but I knew, and I gave them anyway." Clara looked at him for a long moment. She did not say anything cruel because cruelty would not help her, and because she understood she did not excuse, but she understood what fear does to a man with a family and a modest income and a powerful employer who has made clear that loyalty is not optional. "Why are you talking now?" she asked. "Because they came to my home," Graves said. 4 nights ago. 2 men. They didn't threaten me directly, that's not how Price operates. They talked to my wife. They admired my children. They made observations about how comfortable we were in our current neighborhood." His voice tightened. "My youngest is 7 years old." Nathaniel, who had been standing by the window through all of this, turned. "He came to me," he said to Clara. "I've been making careful inquiries for months, and Graves had heard my name through channels. He asked for a meeting. I have documents," Graves said. He reached into his coat and produced a folded packet, thick, tied with plain cord. "Copies. I made them over 2 years, a few pages at a time. I kept them because I don't know exactly why I kept them. Insurance, maybe, or conscience. I'm not sure the 2 are different things." He held the packet out to Clara. She took it. She did not open it immediately. She held it in both hands and felt the weight of it, paper ink, the record of a wrong that had been done to her father and to others. And she held herself very still until she was certain she could open it without her hands shaking. She opened it. Nathaniel moved to stand beside her. Not over her shoulder, not in front of her, beside her, so that they looked at the pages together. The documents were meticulous. Ledger copies, account transfers, correspondence between Price and his associates that named accounts, amounts, dates. Walter Whitaker's name appeared on the third page, the investment figure written in a clerk's careful hand, followed by a notation in different ink, a second hand, sharper, and more deliberate. Redirect. Standard processing. SP. SP. Silas Price. Clara looked at those two initials for a long time. "Is this enough?" she asked Nathaniel quietly. "For a legal complaint, yes," he said. "For a conviction, we need more. We need the ledgers themselves, not copies. Copies can be challenged. The original firm records would confirm these." He paused. "But this is enough to force an investigation. Enough that the right magistrate, one who isn't in Price's pocket, cannot ignore it." "Do you know which magistrates are in his pocket?" Clara asked. "Most of the lower court," Nathaniel said bluntly. "But there are 2 federal circuit judges who are not. Price's influence doesn't extend to federal jurisdiction." He paused. "I have been building a case for federal complaint. What Graves has brought today makes that case viable." Graves stood up. He looked like a man who had set down something very heavy and wasn't sure whether he felt better or worse for the absence of it. "I need to take my family out of the city," he said, "before Price realizes I've talked." "Where will you go?" Clara asked. "My wife's sister is in Philadelphia," he said. "We can be there in 2 days." "Go," Nathaniel said. "I will send word when it is safe to return. You will be needed to testify if this reaches that point." Graves nodded. He looked at Clara once more, with an expression she couldn't entirely categorize. Part guilt, part something that might have been relief at being seen clearly by someone who was choosing not to destroy him with it. "Your father wrote 3 letters, Graves said. The last one he said he had found irregularities and intended to bring them before a proper authority. He was not a man who accepted injustice quietly." "No," Clara said. "He wasn't." Graves left through the garden entrance. The room was quiet for a moment after he was gone, the specific quiet of a space where something significant has just shifted and the air hasn't caught up yet. "He's telling the truth," Clara said. It was not a question. "I believe so," Nathaniel said. "The documents align with what I've found independently. The account names the dates they match." Clara set the document packet on the library table. She pressed both palms flat against the surface and breathed. "My father wrote 3 letters," she said, "and they were handed directly to the man who was stealing from him." "Yes." "He died not knowing whether anyone had heard him." "Yes," Nathaniel said quietly. She stood there for a moment longer. Then she straightened, took her hands off the table and turned around. "We need those original ledgers," she said. "Where would Price keep them?" Nathaniel's expression shifted. Something careful moved through it. "That is the problem," he said. "The firm's offices on Broad Street hold the current records, but the historical ledgers, the ones that would show the original account structures, Price moved them 18 months ago. A clerk at the firm mentioned it to me through an intermediary. He moved them to a private location." "Do you know where—" "I have a strong suspicion," Nathaniel said. "There is a property outside the city, a secondary estate in Westchester County. Price rarely uses it, but he has made several quiet visits in the past 2 years, each one unannounced." He paused. "I believe the ledgers are there." Clara thought. "Can you access that property legally?" "Not without cause," he said. "I cannot obtain a search warrant without a federal judge's order, and I cannot get a federal judge's order without demonstrating sufficient cause, and to demonstrate sufficient cause." "You need the originals to get the originals," Clara said. "Or a confession," Nathaniel said. "Or a second witness." They looked at each other. "Hadley," Clara said. "Your father's solicitor in Virginia. If he has documents, or even if he simply confirms that my father's letters to Price were sent and logged, that is a second point of evidence." She paused. "I need to go to Staunton." Something moved across Nathaniel's face. "That may not be safe," he said. If Price is already worried enough to send anonymous letters to your boarding house. Clara stopped. How do you know about the letter? A beat of silence. I received one as well, Nathaniel said. He reached into his coat and produced a folded note smaller than hers, same plain paper, same unpracticed hand. He handed it to her. She read it. Back away from the Whitaker woman Harrow. Your family's interests are safer without her in them. Clara looked up. When did you get this? The same morning you received yours, he said. I suspect they were delivered simultaneously. A coordinated warning meant to separate us. It had the opposite effect, Clara said. Yes, Nathaniel said. It did. She handed his letter back. He held it for a moment, then set it beside the document packet on the table. Price is watching us, he said. Both of us. And he is worried enough to move. That means we have less time than I thought. Then I need to leave for Virginia within the week, Clara said. I will arrange an escort, Nathaniel said immediately. I don't need. Not for your safety, he said, cutting her off with a directness that was not unkind. For the documents. If you come back from Staunton with papers that support a federal complaint, they need to arrive here intact and in legitimate chain of custody. An escort from my household provides that. He paused. This is not about protecting you, Miss Whitaker. It is about protecting the evidence. Clara looked at him. He met her gaze without flinching, and she understood he had said it that way, deliberately framing it as practicality rather than chivalry, because he had been paying attention to who she was and what she would and would not accept. All right, she said. The escort for the documents. Not for me. For the documents, he agreed. She picked up the packet from the table and tucked it carefully under her arm. I'll write to Hadley today. I won't tell him I'm coming. Price may be watching the mail. Agreed. Nathaniel walked with her toward the corridor. They were nearly at the door when he said, Miss Whitaker. He stopped. She stopped. I want to ask you something, he said, that is not about the documents or the case or Price. She waited. Are you frightened? He asked. Not in the way people ask that question when they expected a particular answer, in the way a person asks it when they actually want to know. Clara thought about it honestly. Yes, she said. I've been frightened since the letter arrived, maybe since my father died. She paused. But I've found that fear and forward motion are not mutually exclusive. You can be afraid and keep going. Most important things require it. Nathaniel looked at her with that expression she still hadn't quite named, the one that had been building since the ballroom. Your father would be proud of you, he said quietly. The words hit her somewhere unguarded. She felt them land, felt the sting behind her eyes that she had been holding back for 3 months of letters and silence and one step forward grief. Don't, she said softly, not angrily. Just not yet. Not in the middle of all this, when she needed to stay steady. I'm sorry, he said. Don't be. She took a breath. Just later, when this is finished. She looked at him. There will be a later. I intend for there to be a later. So do I, Nathaniel said. She left through the garden gate. The street outside Harrow House was ordinary summer chaos. A wagon moving slowly northward. 2 women with parasols, talking near a shop door. A boy selling broadsheets on the corner. Clara moved through it with the packet of documents pressed close to her side under her arm. Her face composed her pace steady. She was 3 blocks from the boarding house when she noticed the carriage. It had been behind her since she turned off the Harrow Estates street. She had not paid it attention. Initially, carriages were not unusual, but it had slowed when she slowed at an intersection, then stopped entirely when she paused outside a milliner's window, as though examining the display. Clara did not look directly at it. She had enough of her father's careful instincts to know that looking directly at a thing you were not supposed to have noticed was the fastest way to let someone know you'd noticed it. She turned right instead of left at the next corner, taking a longer route back to Chambers Street. The carriage turned with her. Her heart was very steady. Steadier than she expected, which surprised her, and then didn't surprise her because she understood that she had passed whatever threshold existed between fear and pure determination. Sometime in the last 2 hours, and on the other side of that threshold, things became simpler. You moved forward. You protected what you were carrying. You did not stop. She reached the boarding house and went straight inside. Margaret was in the parlor. She looked at Clara's face and stood up immediately. "What happened?" she said. "We have the evidence," Clara said. She set the document packet on the table between them. "And we're being watched. And I need to go to Virginia." She sat down. "Sit down, Margaret. I need to tell you everything." Margaret sat. Outside, at the end of Chambers Street, the carriage that had followed Clara Whitaker for 6 blocks came to a slow stop. The man inside it did not get out. He simply watched the boarding house door for a long moment, then produced a small notebook from his coat and wrote something in it. Then he closed the notebook, signaled the driver, and the carriage moved on. Somewhere across the city, Judge Silas Price was going about his morning with the comfortable certainty of a man whose arrangements were firmly in place. He did not yet know that Edmund Graves had already left for Philadelphia. He did not yet know that the documents he had moved to Westchester were no longer his only risk. And he did not yet know, not quite yet, that the woman he had sent to be humiliated at a ballroom dance was currently sitting in a boarding house on Chambers Street, reading his name in ink that was about to destroy him. Clara left for Staunton on a Tuesday before the city was properly awake. Nathaniel's man, a quiet, capable fellow named Thomas, who had the particular quality of being easy to forget. In a crowd handled the hired coach and said almost nothing for the first 3 hours of the journey, which suited Clara perfectly. Margaret sat beside her with a traveling bag on her lap, and her jaw set in the expression she wore when she had decided to stop arguing and start enduring. The road south was long and hot and full of the particular misery of summer travel dust that coated everything stops at ordinary inns where the food was indifferent and the beds were worse. Clara used the hours to think. She went through everything Graves had told her, everything the documents showed, every name and date and account notation. She was building something in her mind, not just a complaint, but a sequence. The order in which things needed to happen, the order in which people needed to speak, the precise timing that would make it impossible for Price to deflect or redirect or simply wait them out. She had been doing this kind of thinking her whole life. Her father had called it her chess mind, the ability to see 4 moves ahead and work backward from the outcome she wanted to the actions she needed to take now. She had never thought of it as a skill exactly. It was simply how her brain worked when the stakes were high enough to focus it. By the time they reached the outskirts of Staunton on the second evening, she knew exactly what she needed from Hadley and exactly how she intended to get it. The solicitor's office was on a narrow street near the courthouse, a modest building, 2 rooms, the kind of professional space that communicated competence without ostentation. Clara had been there twice in her life, both times with her father. The last time she had been 14 years old and had waited on a wooden bench outside while her father and Hadley talked for an hour in low voices about something she was not supposed to hear. She was not waiting on a bench outside this time. Thomas stayed with the coach. Margaret waited in the small reception area. Clara walked directly into Hadley's inner office without knocking. The solicitor looked up from his desk with an expression that moved rapidly through several stages. Surprise recognition. Something that might have been relief and might have been dread, and finally settling into a careful professional blankness that told Clara everything she needed to know about how frightened he was. "Miss Whitaker," he said. "I wasn't expecting." "No," she said. "You weren't." She sat down across from his desk. "Mr. Hadley, I am going to ask you some questions, and I need you to answer them honestly. Not for my sake, for yours. Because the people who asked you to be quiet are about to be the subject of a federal investigation, and the only question left is whether your name appears in that investigation as a victim of their coercion or as a willing participant in it." Hadley's face went through another sequence. He was a man of about 60, bald, with the kind of careful respectability that gets built up over decades and can be lost in an afternoon. Clara watched him calculate. "I don't know what you mean," he said. "Mr. Hadley," she said quietly, "my father trusted you for 20 years. He left papers with you. I know he did, because I know my father, and I know that he would not have been the kind of man who went into a difficult situation without protecting his documentation. He gave you something for safekeeping." She paused. "Where is it?" The silence in that room lasted a very long time. Then Hadley opened the bottom drawer of his desk and produced a sealed envelope. It had been opened and resealed. She could see the faint irregularity in the wax, and the sight of it made something hot move through her chest. "A man came," Hadley said, 8 months ago, after your father's death. He said he was representing Price and Alderman in a routine estate matter. He asked to review any documents your father had left in my custody." Hadley set the envelope on the desk between them. "I showed him this. He read it. He told me it was a private matter between the firm and your father's estate, and that it should remain private. He was very clear about what he meant by that." "Did he take it?" Clara asked. "He tried to," Hadley said. "I told him it was my client's property, and that I could not release it without a proper legal order. He left without it." Hadley looked at the envelope, but he came back 2 weeks later with a letter from Judge Price himself. It was not a legal order. It was a letter, of the kind that does not need to say what it means to be perfectly well understood. "And you kept the document anyway," Clara said. "I kept it," Hadley said, "and I stayed quiet about it. And I have not slept well in 8 months. He looked at her directly. "I am sorry, Miss Whitaker. I was afraid. That is not an excuse. It is simply the truth." Clara picked up the envelope. She broke the resealed wax and opened it. Inside was a single folded document, her father's original investment agreement with the New York Harbor venture. His signature at the bottom, the venture's seal, the share amounts, the date. Complete, legitimate, exactly what she needed. And below the agreement, in her father's own handwriting, 3 pages of careful notes. Dates on which his expected proceeds had not arrived. Letters he had written. The name Price and Alderman circled twice with a notation beside it. "Something is wrong here. Must pursue." Clara read every word. Her throat was tight. She did not let it be anything other than tight. "I need your testimony," she said when she finished. "Written and signed, that you received this document from my father, that a representative of Price attempted to obtain it under pressure, and that you kept it at personal risk." "If I sign that," Hadley said, "Price will know immediately." "Price is already going to know," Clara said. "The question is not whether this reaches him. It will. The question is whether it reaches the Federal Circuit Court first." She looked at him. "Will you sign?" Another long silence. "Your father," Hadley said slowly, "used to say that the law was only as honest as the men who administered it." He reached for his pen. "I would like for once to be one of the honest ones." He signed. Clara witnessed it. Margaret, brought in for the purpose, witnessed it also. They left Staunton the following morning. The return journey north felt different. The documents were inside a locked traveling case that Thomas kept within arm's reach at all times. Clara sat across from it and felt the weight of what it represented, not just her father's money, not just her inheritance, but the particular moral weight of a truth that had been buried and was now finally being carried back into the light. They were one day north of Staunton, stopped at an ordinary roadside inn for the night, when Thomas knocked on her door at 9:30 in the evening. "Miss Whitaker." His voice was low. "There are 2 men at the inn. They arrived an hour after us. They haven't eaten. They haven't asked for rooms. They're sitting in the common room watching the stairs." Clara was already dressed. She had not been planning to sleep easily anyway. "Price?" she said. "I can't say for certain," Thomas said. "But they don't look like travelers." Clara thought fast. "The case," she said. "Move it. Not to my room, they'll search my room first. Can you get it to the innkeeper's storage?" "I know the innkeeper slightly," Thomas said. "He's a decent man." "Do it," Clara said. "Now. And tell Margaret to bolt her door and not open it for anyone but you or me." Thomas moved. Clara waited 10 minutes, then went downstairs herself. Not because she had to, but because she needed to see. The men needed to read them, needed to know what kind of problem she was dealing with. They were sitting near the fireplace. Both large, both unremarkable in the way of men who practiced being unremarkable. One of them looked at her when she came downstairs. Just a glance, quick cataloging. The kind of glance that told her he already knew who she was. She walked to the innkeeper's counter, asked calmly for a pot of tea to be sent to her room, and went back upstairs. She did not sleep. She sat in the chair beside her door with her father's letter in her lap, and listened to the inn settle into its night noises, and she thought about chess and about the 4 moves she needed to make before those men made theirs. By morning, the 2 men were gone. Clara did not know whether they had confirmed what they came to confirm and reported back, or whether Thomas had arranged something she hadn't asked about and didn't need to know. Either way, the case was intact, the documents were safe, and they were back on the road north by sunrise. She wrote to Nathaniel from the road a short note passed to a northbound postal rider at a crossroads stop. "We have what we need. Coming home. Be ready." They reached New York 4 days after leaving Staunton. Nathaniel met them personally at the boarding house on Chambers Street, which was not the behavior of a man maintaining careful social distance. Margaret noticed. Clara noticed that Margaret noticed. Neither of them said anything about it. "Show me," Nathaniel said. Clara opened the case on the parlor table and laid out everything: the original investment agreement, her father's notes, Hadley's signed testimony, and the packet of copies Graves had provided before leaving for Philadelphia. She arranged them in chronological order, the way her father would have arranged them, and then she stepped back. Nathaniel went through every page. He read slowly, which she appreciated. He was not performing thoroughness, he was actually thorough. It took 40 minutes. When he finished, he looked up. "This is enough," he said. "This is more than enough." "For the federal complaint?" Clara asked. "For the federal complaint, for the investigation, and for the civil claim on your inheritance." He paused. "There is one more thing we need to discuss." Clara waited. "I have learned something while you were in Virginia," he said. He set down the last page and looked at her steadily. "Price knows about Graves. I don't know how, possibly someone at the Philadelphia end, possibly a letter intercepted. But he knows Graves has talked." He paused. "He has also moved faster than I expected. 3 days ago he filed a preemptive complaint with the city magistrate's office. Against me." The room went very still. "Against you," Clara said. "Alleging that I have been conducting a campaign of commercial harassment against his firm," Nathaniel said. "It's entirely fabricated, but it establishes him as the aggrieved party in the public record. If he can get that framing settled before the federal complaint is filed, it complicates our position significantly." Margaret said something quiet and pointed that was not entirely appropriate for polite company. Nathaniel had the grace not to react to it. "How long do we have?" Clara asked. "The city magistrate will hold a hearing in 8 days," Nathaniel said. "If we don't file the federal complaint before that hearing, Price's version of events gets the first public airing. With his influence over the local bench, that hearing will go his way, and the narrative becomes Harrow harasses legitimate firm. Whitaker woman is a tool of that harassment." 8 days, Clara said. 7 realistically, Nathaniel said. "The federal circuit judge, I trust Judge Amos Whitfield, is in session in Albany until Thursday. He returns Friday. I need to be in his chambers Friday afternoon with everything we have." Clara looked at the documents on the table. 7 days. The investment agreement, Hadley's testimony. Graves's copy, she had spent weeks building this. 7 days to make sure it arrived in the right place before Price's version of reality hardened into the public record. "There's something else," Nathaniel said, and the particular weight of those 2 words made Clara look at him sharply. "Price has been in contact with his daughter. I have reason to believe Evelyn knows more than she's shown. A friend in the Price household, a woman I trust, told me that Evelyn and her father had a significant argument 3 days ago. She heard your name mentioned." "What kind of argument?" Clara asked. "Evelyn told her father she wanted no part of whatever he was doing with the Whitaker matter," Nathaniel said. "Price told her to stay out of it and do as she was told." Clara was quiet for a moment. She thought about Evelyn in her sitting room, turning her teacup in her hands, the moment of something almost like honesty underneath the performance. "My father tends to ensure that arrangements go according to plan." "She's not like him," Clara said slowly. "No," Nathaniel said. "I don't believe she is." "Could she help us?" Nathaniel considered it. "She knows her father's household, his correspondence, possibly his movements to the Westchester property." He paused. "But approaching her is a significant risk. If she tells her father—" "She won't," Clara said. She was not entirely certain of this, but she was certain enough. "She is afraid of him, not loyal to him, afraid. Those are different problems with different solutions." She looked at Nathaniel. "Let me talk to her." "Clara," Margaret said from her corner of the room, in the tone that meant she was about to say something Clara wouldn't want to hear. "I know," Clara said. "It's a risk." "It's more than a risk," Margaret said. "If Evelyn tells Price that you approached her, that you know about Graves, about the Westchester property." "Then we accelerate everything," Clara said. "We don't wait for Friday. We find Judge Whitfield wherever he is, and we go to him now." She looked at Nathaniel. "Can you reach him before Friday if necessary?" "By urgent messenger, yes," Nathaniel said. "It would be irregular, but yes." "Then here is what we do," Clara said. She sat down, pulled a clean sheet of paper toward her, and picked up the pen that was lying on the writing desk. "I write to Evelyn. Not about the documents, not yet. I invite her to walk with me tomorrow morning in the park. Publicly, socially, nothing remarkable about it. If she comes, she's willing to talk. If she doesn't come, we know where she stands, and we move without her." She began to write. "And if she comes," Nathaniel said carefully, "and she gives you something useful, something that confirms the Westchester location or gives us access to an original ledger." "Then we have everything," Clara said, without looking up from the letter. "And Price doesn't get to file his version of history first." She finished the note in 4 minutes, folded it, held it out. Nathaniel took it and looked at it for a moment before passing it to Thomas, who had appeared at the parlor door with the quiet reliability that Clara had come to appreciate greatly. "Deliver it before evening," Nathaniel said. Thomas left. The room was quiet. Outside, the summer afternoon was going about its ordinary business noise and heat and the particular urgency of a city that moved constantly and waited for no one. Clara looked at the document still spread across the parlor table, her father's handwriting on the notes. Something is wrong here. Must pursue. He had been right. He had been entirely right, and he had not lived to see it proven. She was going to prove it for him. 7 days, she said aloud, not quite to anyone. 6.5, Nathaniel said quietly. But I've found that half-days matter more than people account for. Clara looked at him. That expression again, the one she had been not naming since the ballroom. She understood now what it was. It was the look of a man who had been alone with his own judgment for a very long time, and had just discovered with something between relief and terror that there was someone whose judgment he trusted as much as his own. She understood it because she felt it too. "Then we won't waste them," she said. Evelyn came. Clara had not been entirely certain she would. She had written the invitation with care, warm, but not desperate, social on its surface, carrying nothing beneath it that could be used against her if Evelyn chose to hand it to her father. She had spent an hour on 4 sentences, which was the most difficult kind of writing there was. But Evelyn came. She arrived at the park on time alone, without a maid or a companion, which told Clara everything about the nature of this meeting before a single word was exchanged. A woman who brings witnesses is a woman performing a social call. A woman who comes alone is a woman who has something private to say. They walked for several minutes without speaking about anything that mattered. The heat, the state of the elms, the upcoming autumn assembly season. Clara let Evelyn find her own way to it. Pushing would close her. Patience would open her. It was Evelyn who broke first. "My father knows you went to Virginia," she said quietly. "I expected he would," Clara said. "He knows you brought something back." "Does he know what—" Evelyn was quiet for 3 steps. "He suspects. He isn't certain." She kept her eyes forward. "He had men watching the road south. They reported back that you returned with a locked case." She paused. "He told me last night that the Whitaker matter was nearly resolved, and that I should not concern myself with it." "What did you say?" Clara asked. "I said of course," Evelyn said. Her voice was flat and careful. "That is what I always say." Clara looked at her profile, the perfect posture, the controlled expression, the face of a woman who had spent 24 years performing calm for an audience of 1. "How long have you known?" Clara asked. "About what he does?" Evelyn did not answer immediately. When she did, her voice was very quiet. "I have known that something was wrong for 4 years. I did not know the details. I told myself that not knowing the details was the same as not being responsible." She stopped walking. She turned and looked at Clara directly for perhaps the first time since they had met. It is not the same thing. No, Clara said. It isn't. Your father. Evelyn's jaw was tight. He wrote to my father's firm, multiple times. I found the copies in my father's desk 2 years ago. I was looking for a household document, and I found them instead. I read them. She stopped. I put them back, and I never said anything. The weight of that landed between them. Clara absorbed it. Why are you telling me now? She asked. Sheetal. Because my father told me last night that the Whitaker matter would be resolved before the week was out, Evelyn said. And the way he said it. She stopped, swallowed. I have heard him use that particular tone before. When he says resolved, he does not always mean legally. The air between them changed. What does he mean? Clara asked very carefully. I don't know exactly, Evelyn said. But there is a man he uses, for situations that need to be managed outside of ordinary channels. I have seen this man at the house twice in the past week. She looked at Clara. He was not there for a social call. Clara's mind was already moving. The Westchester property, she said. Is that where my father's original documents are being kept? Evelyn blinked. How do you know about Westchester? Does he keep records there? Clara pressed. Yes, Evelyn said. There is a study on the upper floor. He goes there when he needs to manage paperwork that he does not want managed in the city. She hesitated. There are locked cabinets. I have never seen inside them, but I have seen him return from Westchester with documents that subsequently disappeared from any official record. Evelyn. Clara turned to face her fully. I need to file a federal complaint before your father's city hearing in 7 days. I have copies and testimony, but original ledgers from that property would make the case unassailable. Without them, Price can argue the copies were fabricated. She paused. Is there any way to access that property? Not without my father knowing immediately, Evelyn said. He has staff there who are loyal to him specifically. She was quiet for a moment. Then, but he is going there himself, tomorrow. He told my household he would be away for 2 days. She looked at Clara. I believe he is going to move the documents. He is frightened enough to relocate them somewhere even less accessible. Everything shifted. Tomorrow, Clara said. He leaves at dawn, Evelyn said. If someone were to follow him at a distance, they could confirm the location. And if the right legal authority accompanied them, a federal officer with a valid warrant could enter the property, Clara said. Yes, Evelyn said. But you would need the warrant before dawn. Clara was already calculating. Nathaniel, Judge Whitfield, the urgent messenger. The irregular approach that was possible if the circumstances justified it. She looked at Evelyn and understood that this woman who had come alone and spoken honestly and was visibly terrified of what she was doing had just handed her the thing she needed most. Why? Clara asked one more time, not suspiciously, genuinely. After everything, why help me? Evelyn looked at her hands. Because your father wrote 3 letters asking for what was rightfully his, she said, and my father had them buried. And I knew, and I did nothing. She looked up. I cannot undo that, but I can stop doing nothing. Clara held her gaze for a moment. Then she said, Go home. Behave exactly as you normally would. Don't change anything. Don't give him any reason to think this conversation happened. And you? Evelyn asked. I have work to do, Clara said. She left the park at a pace that was not quite running and went directly to Nathaniel. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was already standing. I can reach Whitfield tonight, he said. By urgent messenger to his home in the city. He returned from Albany yesterday, not Friday. I learned this an hour ago. He's already here, Clara said. Already here, Nathaniel confirmed. Which means if I go to him tonight with what we have, the investment agreement, Hadley's testimony, Graves's copies, and Evelyn's information about the Westchester property. He can issue the warrant tonight, Clara said. It is irregular, Nathaniel said, but not unprecedented. A federal judge can issue an emergency warrant when there is credible evidence that material evidence is about to be destroyed. He paused. Which is exactly what Price is about to do. Then go, Clara said. Now. Tonight. Nathaniel reached for his coat. He stopped at the door and looked back at her. "You should stay at the boarding house tonight. Lock the door. Keep Thomas outside in the hall." "I know," Clara said. "I mean it," he said. "Price's man, whoever Evelyn was describing, if Price becomes aware that something has moved today." "Nathaniel." She said his given name for the first time. It came out naturally without her deciding to do it. "Go get the warrant. I will be careful. Go." He went. The night was the longest Clara had spent since the night her father died. She sat in her room at the Wentworth boarding house with Thomas outside her door, and Margaret asleep in the next room, and the locked case of documents on the floor beside her chair. And she did not sleep. And she did not allow herself to imagine the ways this could go wrong, because that was a road with no useful destination. She thought about her father instead. About the letters he had written, the truth he had been trying to reach, the fever that had taken him before he could get there. She thought about the fact that he had trusted Hadley, had trusted the legal system, had trusted that honesty was a thing that ultimately protected itself. He had not been wrong about that. He had simply run out of time before the protection arrived. She was going to finish what he started. That was the whole of it. At 2:30 in the morning, she heard a quick knock 3 times, then once the signal she and Nathaniel had agreed on. She opened the door. He was there. His coat was dusty, and his expression was controlled, and in his hand was a folded document bearing a federal court seal. "Whitfield signed it," he said. Clara exhaled once, a single breath that carried 3 months of held tension. "A federal marshal will meet us at the Westchester Road at 5 o'clock, Nathaniel said. "We need to leave within the hour." "I'm already dressed," Clara said. They reached the Westchester property behind Price's carriage, close enough to confirm his arrival, far enough that his driver didn't see them. The federal marshal, a quiet, deliberate man named Holt, who carried his authority the way certain men carried it, simply and without announcement, had 2 deputies with him. They waited until Price had been inside the property for 20 minutes, long enough that he would have gone directly to the study. Long enough that if he was there to move documents, he would be in the act of it. Marshal Holt presented the warrant at the door. The staff resisted for approximately 4 minutes, the particular resistance of men who were loyal but not foolish enough to obstruct a federal officer with legal paperwork. They stepped aside. Clara and Nathaniel followed Marshal Holt up the stairs. The study door was closed. Holt knocked once, announced his office and the warrant, and opened it. Judge Silas Price was standing at an open cabinet with a stack of leather-bound ledgers in his arms. He looked at Holt. He looked at the warrant. He looked at Nathaniel. And then, last as if saving it, he looked at Clara. She had imagined this moment many times during the long weeks of building toward it. She had imagined feeling triumph or anger or the particular satisfaction of a wrong being corrected. What she actually felt was quieter and more complete than any of those things. She felt her father standing behind her, not literally, not in any way she would have tried to explain to someone else, but present in the way that people we have loved and lost are sometimes present when we do the thing they were trying to do. "Put the ledgers down, Judge Price," Marshal Holt said. Price put them down. His face had gone the color of old paper. The dignity that he wore in public, that untouchable, settled dignity of a man who had never once been held accountable, cracked open in that moment, like ice at the end of winter. Underneath it was something much smaller and more ordinary, a frightened man who had believed his own invincibility for too long. "This is a misunderstanding," he said. "No, sir," Holt said. "It isn't." They took the ledgers. They took every document in the cabinet. They took the correspondence file that Price had apparently been intending to destroy that morning, a thick folder that, as Clara learned later, contained letters between Price and 3 of his associates that detailed the redirection scheme in terms so explicit that his own attorney reportedly refused to read them twice. Price was not arrested that morning. The law moved more slowly than justice, which Clara had always known was the law's most significant failing. But the federal complaint was filed before noon. The ledgers were in federal custody, and the city magistrate's hearing, the one Price had arranged to establish himself as the aggrieved party, was postponed indefinitely at the request of the Federal Circuit Court. Postponed indefinitely was, in the language of the law, the sound of a door closing. The weeks that followed were not simple. They were not a sudden resolution. They were the hard, grinding work of truth being established through proper channels, which required patience and documentation, and the willingness to sit in rooms that smelled of legal paper and answer the same questions in precise language until the record was clear. Clara did all of it. Hadley came to New York and gave his testimony before the federal magistrate with the posture of a man who had finally decided to live with himself properly. Graves returned from Philadelphia and did the same. The ledgers confirmed every figure in the copies Graves had made. Walter Whitaker's shares were identified, their redirected proceeds calculated, and the legal claim on Clara's inheritance established beyond any practical challenge. Price's attorney attempted 3 separate motions to have the complaint dismissed. Each one failed. Price himself went very quiet, the silence of a man whose machinery had stopped and who did not yet know how to exist without it. Evelyn left her father's house 6 weeks after the Westchester morning. She moved into modest rooms across the city with a friend from childhood and sent Clara a short letter that said, "Only, I hope this finds you well. I am finding out who I am without him telling me. It is harder than I expected and better than I feared. E." Clara wrote back. She did not know if they would ever be friends exactly. There was too much complicated history between them for simple friendship. But she thought they might become something more durable than enemies. 2 women who had been used as instruments by the same man and had in the end chosen differently than he expected. On a Thursday afternoon in late October, with the summer finally broken and the first cool air of autumn moving through the city, Clara sat in Nathaniel Harrow's library. Not the formal library where they had first met with Graves, but the smaller private one on the 2nd floor, where he actually read and signed the final legal document restoring her father's estate to her name. Nathaniel sat across from her. When she set down the pen, he didn't say anything immediately. He had a quality she had come to value enormously in a person he did not fill silence with noise just to fill it. "It's done," she said. "It's done," he agreed. She sat with that for a moment. 3 months and 12 days since she had stood near a wall in this man's ballroom, holding a glass of lemonade. She never drank. Listening to Evelyn Price lay a trap. 4 months since her father had died, not knowing whether anyone would ever hear him. "He would have been pleased," Nathaniel said quietly. This time, she let it land. She didn't tell him not yet. She felt the full weight of it, the grief and the completion and the specific relief of a thing finished, and she held it, like you hold something precious carefully with both hands. "Yes," she said. "He would have." Nathaniel leaned forward slightly. "I have been trying for some weeks now to find the appropriate moment and the appropriate words for something I want to say to you." He paused. "I have found that there is no appropriate moment, and that whatever words I choose will be imperfect, and that this is likely the best it's going to get." Clara looked at him. "I am not a man who says things he does not mean," he said. "So I want to be precise. What I feel for you is not gratitude, and it is not admiration, though it contains both of those things. It is recognition. The particular thing that happens when you encounter a person whose character is so clear that you stop wondering who they are. I have not wondered who you are since the night you crossed my ballroom floor." He stopped. "I would like if you are willing to stop wondering who we might be to each other." Clara was quiet for a moment, not from uncertainty, from the desire to give the answer the weight it deserved. "I came to New York," she said, "to find a truth about my father's money. I did not come to find anything else." She paused. "But I have found that the things worth keeping are rarely the things you came looking for." She held his gaze. "I am willing." He did not reach for her hand across the desk. He stood up, walked around it, and offered his hand, the way he had offered it once before, directly without theater, the way a man offers something he means. She took it. Outside the city made its ordinary noise. Somewhere across town, the legal machinery continued its slow, necessary grind toward accountability. Somewhere in Philadelphia, Edmund Graves was putting his children to bed in a house where no one had made quiet observations about the neighborhood in 6 weeks. Somewhere in modest rooms across the city, Evelyn Price was finding out who she was without her father's voice telling her. And in the private library of Harrow House on a Thursday afternoon in October 1815, Clara Whitaker understood something her father had tried to teach her, and that she had only now learned completely that dignity was not a thing society gave you. It was a thing you carried into every room, every storm, every trap that was laid for you, and refused to set down regardless of who was watching. She had carried it across a ballroom floor with her hands shaking and her chin level. She had carried it through anonymous letters and carriage shadows and a frightened solicitor's office and a Westchester study where a powerful man finally ran out of road. She had carried it all the way through, and it had brought her here. Not rescued, not swept up, not grateful for someone else's strength, but here standing on ground she had earned with her own courage, her own patience, and her own truth, holding the hand of a man who had been wise enough to stand beside her rather than in front of her in a city that had tried to send her home, ashamed, and had failed completely. Clara Whitaker had come to New York to recover what was taken from her father. She had recovered it, every last piece of it, and she had never once asked anyone's permission to exist.